Well, good morning and welcome back to day 3 of the NWR Communications Small Cap Investor Conference. On the call this morning, we've got Calix Limited, the Managing Director, Phil Hodgson. So Calix has developed patented technology to provide industrial solutions that address global sustainability challenges. Calix's core tech is being used to develop environmentally friendly solutions for things including advanced batteries, crop protection, aquaculture, wastewater, and carbon reduction. Calix has identified several global challenges that have emerged in the last decade and are increasingly putting our planet at risk. By aligning innovation and development initiatives, Calix is striving to make an impactful and meaningful contribution to solving these global challenges. So presenting today, we have Phil Hodgson, who's the Managing Director of Calix. Phil joined Calix as CEO in 2013, became a director 1 year later. He brings a technical and commercial background from his previous life at Shell, where for more than 14 years, he worked across all sectors of the downstream oil industry, including refining, supply, marketing, sales, pricing strategy, risk management, corporate strategy, and even M&A as well. So with that, Phil, I'll pass across to you in a moment. For any attendees who'd like to ask questions, you can submit them via the Q&A box at the bottom of your panel, and we'll get to them at the end of Phil's presentation. So with that, Phil, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the introduction. Thanks all for tuning in and your time this morning. So let me just move through the usual disclaimer to what I'll cover today. I'll give a quick snapshot and overview for those of you who are perhaps less familiar with the company, and also cover the core technology, core platform technology that underpins our business. I'll look at the business verticals that the technology touches, and then I'll move into the milestones for FY21. So we sort of outline these milestones after the annual results came out, and we did a bit of a roadshow then. And so what I want to do is update with respect to performance or progress against those milestones that we outlined. So without further ado, let me move through into just a quick snapshot of the business or overview of the business, if you like, before I move into the core technology. So the business, despite the fact that it's a technology company, we actually sell stuff. We wash our face with respect to cash while we develop multiple verticals into potential very large businesses. So we do have sales revenues that are growing, and one of our key priorities is growing those sales revenues. We've got sales into Australia and New Zealand in the wastewater space. We've got sales moving into aquaculture in Southeast Asia. We made an important acquisition last year in the US, and again, that's focused around our wastewater space. And so sales is an important part of the growth story of Calix. We also have a good supply chain. We actually have our own mine here in Australia, and I'll run through what we mine and why. So we've got a good control of our supply chain all the way through to end customer. The business is very quickly scalable, and so what we have is invested capital already that allows the business to scale substantially. So we're only about 15% utilised on the production facilities that we have in place right now. So not a huge amount of capital required to scale. The business models that we have, I'll cover off for the different verticals, but all are proving pretty robust. And of course, the wastewater business model being the one that's being rolled out in the States at the moment, I'll talk through in quite some detail. We also have some verticals that are being developed, not yet commercial, but we've been very successful using our technology to get funding for those verticals. If I look forward from where we're at today, we've got about 2 to 3 years of funding in batteries and in CO2, and I'll talk a little bit about both of those. And also in terms of validation of the technology, we have some very big partners that we're now working with around the world. If you have a look at the list here on this slide, for example, for our CO2 mitigation business, which is focused around Europe, we're in a project with Heidelberg Cement, Last Cemex, Solvay, Tarmac, which is a CRH company, so the largest cement and lime companies in the world. And also you'll see there Engie, which is one of the largest utilities providers in the world. And when I go through the CO2 part of our business, I'll talk to you a little bit about why those guys are joining with us to develop the technology. So what is the technology? This slide here hopefully will help explain it. I'll also try and explain it as I sit here in front of you. Basically, what we have is a new type of kiln or furnace. If I sort of illustrate it here with this little toilet roll, basically our production facility at Bacchus Marsh, this thing's 22 metres high and about 1.8 metres in diameter. But we heat the outsides of this tube to about 1,000 degrees centigrade. And we take materials and grind them up to quite a fine size, and that gets dropped down the tube. And as it falls through the tube, it heats up, and any trapped gases in those little particles come out of those particles. So the furnace gases or the heating medium doesn't mix with the particles at all. And that gives us a couple of key advantages, two key advantages of the technology. The first advantage is that if we're processing stuff like limestone, half the weight of a lump of limestone is CO2. And you can imagine as the limestone trickles down through the tube, the CO2 that comes out of that limestone makes its way back up and comes out as a pure stream. Why is that important? Well, the cement and lime industries contribute 8% of global CO2 emissions, 8%, and 2/3 of that is coming from the limestone itself. So you can see this is technology is a way to continue to make cement and lime, but capture the CO2 that's coming from the limestone. The second advantage of the technology is we can use all sorts of different minerals. And in fact, our own mine in South Australia, we're mining a mineral called magnesite. It's sort of this white chalky substance here. And we're grinding that up to a powder and putting that down our tube as well. But we can produce very, very high surface areas. So as the gases come out of those particles, we can maximize the porosity of those particles. And those high surface areas translates to competitive advantage in several different verticals. And I'll cover off those verticals shortly. But those you can see on this slide, for example, some of the verticals are in a wastewater, aquaculture, lake remediation, crop protection. And in fact, that's all with the magnesium part of our business. If we start with a different mineral called manganese, we're actually making some very, very high surface area, tiny particles that are ultimately going into advanced battery research. So quite a few different applications that the technology touches. As I say, the CO2 capture piece we're developing in Europe, some pretty big partners, and several different verticals underway as well with the other parts, the other application of the technology. Patent protected, lots of money invested today to develop the technology, and so really quite an interesting platform technology touching multiple verticals. So if I just move through, apologies, I'll just click through to what we're at and what we're up to this year. Here are the different verticals, if you like, across the spectrum from in-market and commercialised all the way through to R&D. In market and commercialised is our water and wastewater business. It's our magnesium-based product. So we have a mine in South Australia that we're using to support that business in Australia and New Zealand, and starting to seed that technology into US, and also looking at a European market expansion. I'm going to talk more about that vertical as I move through the update presentation. It's our equal highest priority for this year is to continue to expand revenue and margin in that vertical. Aquaculture are the next two verticals across. They're in the pre-commercial stage, so sort of less than $500,000 revenue sort of area, but growing and of interest. But those are perhaps slightly lower priority than the wastewater bit, which is material in terms of its revenues and growing quite quickly. The other vertical I'll spend a little bit of time on today is CO2 mitigation in lime and cement. And this particular vertical we've classed our equal highest priority this year, and I'll talk a bit about why that is. The last vertical is our battery vertical. That vertical I'm going to be talking about next week on Wednesday. So anyone of interest in our battery technology, please tune into that webinar, which will take place at 10 p.m. Wednesday next week, and I'll give an update on our battery R&D. So just into the first vertical I want to spend a little bit of time today talking about, which is our wastewater treatment vertical. This particular vertical is about the product we make based upon magnesium that can be used in wastewater treatment for what's called alkalinity. If you think of acid and alkali back to your chemistry days, when water needs to be treated, you need to make sure that it's balanced to an appropriate pH, and you need alkalinity. And traditionally, alkalinity have been things like caustic soda or sodium hydroxide, which is a standard alkali, and those particular substances are not particularly nice. Here's the stuff we make. It's magnesium hydroxide. I've got a little bit on my finger here. You can see it there. If that was caustic soda, my finger play. And so what we have here is something that's actually 30% more powerful than caustic soda, but extremely safe. It buffers naturally to pH of about 9, and you wouldn't do this with caustic soda either. You have to take me to the hospital. So you can see there it's a very safe substance, but more powerful alkali than caustic soda. And this particular part of our business is what we're expanding rapidly in the US. We made an acquisition in December. And so we've been running that business for about 10 months now, just over 10 months. And our target there was to take our technology to make a very stable version of this and powerful version of this that helps not only get alkali right, but trap things like phosphates and nitrates within the biotreater, so you can lower your nitrate and phosphate levels in your wastewater discharge. Taking that technology and rolling that out through an existing business that we bought in the States. And so how's that rollout going? At the moment, we've completed 2 upgrades. So one last financial year and now one this year. So 2 upgrades have now been done to the manufacturing facilities that we purchased in the States. And those 2 upgrades have gone in to reduce cost and start to expand the business there. So with a more stable and better active product, we can actually start to expand the footprint of the existing business there. That existing business was only about 6 to 8% of the market potential in the US. It was turning over about $8 million US bucks. And so you can see there's quite an upside in terms of the total market potential in the US. And we've started that journey now, rolling our technology across that business and starting that expansion. And when you look at our revenue numbers for this year, you can start to see the impact that that's going to have on our business. Obviously, our total revenues are up substantially as a result of that US acquisition. The sales revenues are up multiples as a result of that acquisition. And the acquisition itself is starting to grow underneath the rollout of the technology to that business. So even compared to last year, and even with the headwinds of COVID and these sorts of things that are shutting down those plants, we've still managed to grow that business 6% in terms of total revenue compared to the same period last year. But even more importantly, we've grown the gross margin of that business by 5%, from 25% on average to over just on 30% gross margin. And so that's the impact of our technology coming into that business, taking some costs out, logistics savings and production savings, and starting to get that through that business there. So the US really going well for us despite the COVID headwinds, nicely on track. And of course, the last piece of the strategy with the wastewater business is to start to do the same thing that we did in the US and look at Europe. And so really the strategy around Europe is to start with some trials and start to move our product there and look for other potential acquisitions that may expand our business portfolio there. So that European strategy is underway. We have a first paid trial now in Germany. Why Germany? Germany is one of those countries that is suffering a bit under the discharge levels of phosphates and nitrates. They've actually been taken to court by the EU for their phosphate and nitrate discharges. So they've got a big burning platform problem. And so we think we've got a nice solution for that problem. And so that's why we're targeting Germany first. So overall, I think wastewater treatment, in terms of progress to date, all running to plan, if not slightly ahead with respect to gross margin. And obviously the European part of that strategy now underway as well. CO2 mitigation is the other vertical I just want to cover in a little more detail today. This particular piece is about taking a technology that we sort of had in concept in 2015. We were successful in winning funding from the EU in 2016 to build a pilot facility. And in the background on this slide, you'll see a picture of that facility. It's a 60-metre tall tower demonstrating separation of CO2 in the production of cement. That pilot project was completed about mid-June 2019. And we've been running that pilot project ever since to prove up the technology. We've recently been able to upgrade the throughputs on that to about 80% of our design throughputs. So it's starting to move quite nicely there. But quite early on, we were able to prove the technology concept. We separated sort of 95+% CO2 purity out the top, produced a product at the bottom that is suitable for cement, meal, etc. So what are the next stages with this technology? In terms of the key achievements we're targeting this year, we're actually going to extend the run campaign. Obviously, again, COVID has impacted a little bit on our ability to do all the test runs we want. We had both of our engineers on site. They're unfortunately come down with COVID. The test site's in Belgium. They've since recovered, but of course, that all of the roll-upon impacts of COVID have impacted our test program. The EU have offered us to extend another 6 months of that test program, which obviously we'll take up. So that particular project is going to run through to about mid next year. And we need to do some longer operational runs there to continue to prove the robustness of the technology. But suffice to say, the early results were sufficient for the EU to give us another 18 million euro. And we got commitments from industrial partners to come in for another 9 million in cash, 9 million in kind, to build what's called our Lilac 2, our upscale of that project. That project launched in April, and the basis of design of that project is due Q1 next year. And so that basis of design is running through a process now that's on track. But perhaps the most interesting thing that we're targeting this financial year is to start to see some traction with respect to commercial application of the technology. And while there's still some development to go in the cement space, there's some other applications as well that are looking at in terms of the magnesium refractory business, the lime business. So lime goes into steel and pulp and paper and all these sorts of things. We've basically starting to be very under-resourced in our commercial part of our business and our technical part of the business to start to run the feasibility studies and the interaction with multiple inquiries coming in for this technology now. Why are all these inquiries coming in? Well, again, on the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see the timeline. Even from just 2018, the world has changed. By 2020, the EU have legislated net CO2, zero CO2 by 2050. Many countries and many companies, including Heidelberg Cement, have followed. So this technology is absolutely essential for the lime and cement industries to hit those types of targets. So we're running really fast on this one, and our targeted next steps for this financial year are to continue to run fast. There's at least an opportunity that we want to get over the line this year in cement and lime, and at least one in refractories. So watch this space on that particular application. Lots happening there. So just in terms of a quick set of backup slides, if you like, I just wanted to highlight we've got a new member of our board of directors. So Helen Fisher joined the board about a month ago, or just over a month ago, and so it's great to have someone with Helen's experience on M&A, finance, life sciences background as well. So there's applications of our technology being developed into those types of applications, and so very pleased to have Helen on board with us. And the last slide I'll very quickly cover is just in terms of our performance since listing in July 2018. You can see there the share prices held up pretty well, and obviously that's a result of us hitting our milestones quite successfully over the course of the last 2 years. No shares are left in escrow, so basically it's almost fully free floated. There's a little bit there in some warrants that are still outstanding, but overall we're fully free floated. You can see board and management have significant stake in the company. And that's largely our own cash that we've put into this company as well. So very ardent believers and aligned with our shareholders. And you can see a great register as well with some significant institutional support behind us. So there's a quick snapshot of Calix and where we're up to this year. So I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks very much, Phil. Great presentation. So to any attendees, any questions you might have, please put them right into the Q&A box at the bottom of your panel and we'll take them to Phil. First question that's come in here, Phil. So of the 5 verticals that you're working in, which would you view as the most competitive and therefore less attractive for Calix?
Interesting question, actually. They're all competitive, but we feel we've got some significant competitive advantage, which is why we're pursuing them. If we were just me too and we're hoping for a marketing edge or something, we wouldn't be in them. Wastewater is obviously competitive space, but the wins, if you like, toward safer products with less impact on the environment are really behind us in this space. So I think all of them are equally as competitive, but in all of them, we wouldn't be there unless we had a significant competitive advantage given to us by our technology.
Thanks, Phil. Probably a pretty specific question, but what do you do with the captured CO2?
Yeah, good question. That's obviously the other side of the Geordie knot, if you like. That CO2 is not ours. That CO2 belongs to the cement or lime company that we're capturing it for. they're developing all sorts of potential solutions there. So in Europe, for example, they're looking at growing algae. They're looking at sequestration in recycled demolition fines and these sorts of things. And of course, they're also looking at sequestration. So taking the CO2 and ultimately burying it. With the amount of CO2 we're talking, we're talking 2 billion tonnes a year from the cement industry. Sequestration is going to have to be a part of the solution. But that's sort of outside our remit to develop the solutions there. We're just trying to get the lowest cost, most efficient way to separate it for our potential customers in the cement and lime industries.
Thanks, Phil. And a related question from someone else. What happens to the processed wastewater?
So our customers in the wastewater treatment side, who are utilities, food processors, for example, and those types of industrials. So they're already disposing of their wastewater into the sewer system, if you like, or the trade waste sewer systems. But the thing is, and those eventually go their way to municipal wastewater treatment facilities that either discharge into the sea or discharge into rivers, etc. What we're doing is working with our customers to get those discharges down in phosphorus, nitrogen, biological oxygen demand, so have their biotreaters work more efficiently, etc. So all wastewater ultimately ends up in water, unfortunately. But what we're doing is working with our customers to make that, I guess, a much cleaner process and a much more efficient process.
Thanks, Phil. Can you talk again about your the nature of your revenue model, in the sense that is it sort of one-off and very project related, or is it repeatable?
Yeah, so I might just jump up to the verticals and talk about each vertical. So with water and wastewater, for example, that's basically as you bring a customer on, it may be a contracted customer or it may be just a negotiated supply agreement. That's sort of like an annuity stream. You're selling them a product, you're selling them this particular product and they've got to keep adding it to their wastewater as their wastewater moves through their biotreatment system. So that's a very renewable or recurring income stream, if you like. And as you add customers, basically you're building your revenue streams. And so that's where that growth is coming from. And typically customers, we've noticed, are pretty sticky. Once we've won them, the customer churn sort of 5 to 7%. So that's a nice recurring revenue stream that you can just continue to build as you roll out your market. With the CO2 mitigation, the business model there is a bit different. At the moment, it's very project-based income. So as we build these pilot facilities, we're actually getting paid for it, and so that's quite lumpy. But we are paid out to the end of 2023, 24 at the moment. We've got a forward income stream we can see there. But ultimately, once that is mature and the technology is ready for commercialization, we'll step back into a royalty type model. And so that royalty type model then becomes a much lower intensity, and therefore higher margin, sort of revenue stream that will sit there and churn off how much CO2 you've separated, for example.
That's great, Phil. And looking at the competitive landscape, are you able to sort of comment on any competing technologies that are out there that you kind of rub up against?
Yeah, sure. So let's look at, and again, it's different across different verticals, but I'll concentrate on the sort of high priority ones. So let's look at CO2, for example. In CO2, particularly with the lime and cement industries, it's known as a hard industry to mitigate the CO2 from. That's because so much CO2 is coming out of the process itself, not the heating medium. So traditionally you've had amines or chemical absorption type systems which have been used to trap CO2 out of power stations. It's proven quite difficult to apply those to cement and lime, although they are pushing ahead with it. And it's quite expensive because running those systems tend to add 30 or 40% extra power bill to these plants. So we've got an advantage in that we could be much more efficient. The energy it takes for us to capture the CO2 is virtually zero theoretical energy penalty once we're at scale. And so that's the advantage we have, but what the challenge we've got to overcome is our process is quite integrated in the cement production process. And so if I was to look at the competitive landscape in, say, CO2 mitigation, there's an end-of-pipe solution in amine, but it's quite energy expensive. And there's our solution, which is very energy efficient, but it requires integration, and that's our challenge with respect to scale up.
Phil. And are you able to elaborate on the phase 1 test program for refractories and what the next steps would look like to progress to a license agreement, and also what such an agreement could potentially look like?
Yeah, obviously we're under sort of commercial and confidence negotiations, so I'll do my best. But certainly phase 1 is about having a look at smaller scale. Can the products we produce, very similar to cement and lime, can the products that we produce that captures the CO2 through our process then go into an end use and not have to change the way they make it? So in refractories, which are basically they're like bricks, if you like, they're used in steel and cement kilns to protect the steel from the heat. So they're like an insulating layer. So of course, our potential customers and clients in that space want to be able to make those bricks the same way they do now. And so does the product that we produce for them go to make those bricks the same way? So we've done smaller scale versions of that testing. So we've put several hundred kilos through our process and started to do some demonstration along with that client to see that it is making a product that is at least similar, if not slightly better than what they're doing currently. Phase 2 is a scale up of that. So you move from several hundred kilos to several hundred tons. And so that's the next step in that process. Obviously, once that is proven at that scale, the commercial piece really starts to kick in. Is really how do we co-develop a project that demonstrates the CO2 capture piece as well as produce a product for their clients. And so that's the piece that we really would like to hammer out this financial year.
Thanks, Phil. And just going back to the competitive landscape, are you able just to touch briefly again, specifically on the wastewater treatment competitive landscape and who's who in the zoo there?
Yeah, sure. And look, I'll concentrate on the US perhaps because that's clearly our biggest market at the moment. So there's two other key players in the US. They've tended to sort of gravitate to different parts of the country. So there's one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast. This little business that we've purchased, we're up in the Pacific Northwest and Midwest. So ultimately that business we're looking to grow, obviously geographically. And so they're providing a magnesium hydroxide similar chemically to ours, but the problems they face are issues of activity and stability. And so that's where our technology gives us an advantage. Activity helps you capture more phosphates and nitrates, and stability helps you transport the product a lot longer without it settling in your truck. You can imagine if you had a truck full of paint and you left it there for a few months, the paint would all settle down and be impossible to get out. This particular product for our competitors often faces that issue in the space of a few hours. And so the ability to make a stable product with our technology is part and parcel of why we have competitive advantage. So really the competitors, direct competitors in the US, that sort of characterizes them. But it's not just them that we're after. We're also after the caustic market. The caustic market there is 10 times the size of the magnesium market. And so the advantages of the technology with respect to caustic replacement can be widened quite substantially. And so that's the piece that is really quite exciting. How many new customers can we convert from caustic to this particular product? And so that'll be a market, as I say, potentially 10 times the size, or roughly about $1 billion US.
That's great, Phil. It's a huge addressable market, clearly. That concludes the questions that we had for the session today. So we'll wrap things up there. Phil, I might just pass back to you for any parting remarks.
Yeah, no, thanks very much again for the opportunity to speak today. Thanks all for tuning in. As I say, we have our annual general meeting next week on Wednesday at 9 a.m. followed at 10 a.m. by a bit of a deep dive, if you like, into our battery program, our battery research and development program. So hopefully you can all join me there, where we'll talk about another vertical, which is also very exciting.
Excellent. Thanks, Phil. Looking forward to it. And thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.